Another component of homeopathy worth taking a close look at is the preparation of homeopathic remedies. As we read on Wikipedia, quote, "The preparations are manufactured using a process of homeopathic dilution, in which a chosen substance is repeatedly diluted in alcohol or distilled water, each time with the containing vessel being bashed against an elastic material, commonly a leather-bound book." A common explanation for his settling on this process is said to be that Samuel Hahnemann found preparations subjected to agitation in transit, such as in saddlebags or in a carriage, were more potent. Hahnemann had a saddlemaker construct a special wooden striking board, covered in leather on one side and stuffed with horsehair. End quote. What a silly thing to do at each successive stage of the dilution. Could you imagine something analogous where, at the Pfizer manufacturing plants, every time they finished mixing up a batch of drugs, they banged on a gigantic gong, or gathered in a circle and uttered in unison some kind of incantation, believing this to have an effect on the quality of the final product? This is superstition in its purest and most ludicrous form, and it shows just what kind of an irrational thinker the founder of homeopathy truly was. This is the same kind of junky logic that led primitive tribes to perform ritualistic rain dances, or sacrifice children to the gods, in order to ensure a bountiful harvest. Why even bother with dilutions, you might ask? Wouldn't that just be reducing the potency and thus the effectiveness of the homeopathic medicine? This might be a reasonable assessment if we're talking about conventional Western medicine, but to think this way about homeopathy is to fail to grasp the delicate nuances of what's going on here. In the world of homeopathy, the more diluted the original substance becomes, the more potent the homeopathic treatment. As we read on homeopathichealing.org, quote, "How can it be that the more a substance is diluted, the stronger or more potent it becomes? Isn't it a paradox that the highest potencies have the least amount of the original substance? This paradox resolves when we understand that a remedy acts not as a chemical or material factor, but rather as an informational field. Through a process that we are just beginning to understand, the repetitive dilution and succussion impart a patterning to the molecules of the dilutant. The pattern varies depending upon the nature of the substance to which it is exposed, and apparently carries information related to the nature of that substance. The more the solution is diluted and succussed, the more the pattern becomes coherent, intense, and detailed." End quote. If this sounds like complete and utter nonsense to you, you and I are very much on the same page here. On what grounds do they reach such a startling conclusions about how patterns of information can be somehow imprinted within the solvent to a more and more coherent degree, as less and less of the original solute is present? Great question, and one that's not answered in the article, because not surprisingly, no references to scientific literature which demonstrate this phenomenon are provided. As we all learned in our K-12 physics classes, the molecules in a liquid are not static. There's actually quite a bit of movement going on. So how exactly is information stored within a simple liquid like water? Wouldn't that mean that the movement of the molecules would have to stop so that the molecules could remain arranged in a particular way? And if so, wouldn't the water turn to ice then? If the dilution process truly does impart a patterning to the molecules of the dilutants, then surely this process could be measured and demonstrated in the laboratory. Well, according to the European Academy's Science Advisory Council, this claim has been investigated and thoroughly refuted. As they write in a 2017 report, quote, "Detailed scientific analysis of the influence of dissolved species on the structure and dynamics of water has refuted the homeopathic claim that water retains a memory even long after the last molecule of homeopathic entity has been removed by serial dilution. The impact of dissolved species on water is short range, of the order of nanometers, 10 to the negative 9th meters, does not extend beyond their immediate hydration layer, and does not demonstrate any long-term cooperative effect, nanoseconds, 10 to the negative 9th seconds, or even shorter. Thus, the homeopathy proposition that efficacy can be explained by a long-term memory of water has been proved scientifically unfounded and implausible." End quote. And they write on homeopathichealing.org that the remedy acts as an informational field. What does this even mean? What is an informational field, and how does this differ from an electrical or magnetic field? How can we measure this informational field? What device do they use to detect such a field? And where can I read about the laboratory experiments where the characteristics of this field are identified and precisely quantified? They write that this takes place, quote, through a process that we are just beginning to understand, end quote. Translation, we don't have a fucking clue what we're talking about here. And even if we grant that we truly are just beginning to understand this phenomenon, then what rubbish have they been believing for the past 200 years in homeopathy? James Randi had a pretty good joke about homeopathic dilutions in a lecture that he gave on the subject.
And another claim that they make, you'll love this one, the more dilute the medicine is, they say, the more powerful it is. Now, wait a minute. We heard about a guy in Florida, the poor man, he was on homeopathic medicine. He died of an overdose. He forgot to take his pill.
And Tracy Moody created this brilliant cartoon about homeopathy. As we can see, it shows a guy at a homeopathy store with a basket full of items, and the cashier tells him that his total comes to $89.75. Rather than paying in the traditional manner, he grabs a pair of scissors, snips off a tiny piece of a $1 bill into a glass of water, slides it over to the cashier, and says, "Keep the change," while she has a befuddled look on her face. That is good stuff right there. The absurdity of homeopathic dilutions reaches new heights when you consider just how dilute we're talking about here. As James Randi points out in another lecture,
if they take one part of the substance and put it in 10 parts of water and shake it up, it's called successing, not shaking up. They got to have a technical term for it. A certain way it's got to be shaken. And then what you've got is called a one solution, okay? That's called a one solution. If you take one part of that and put it in 10 parts of water, it's 1 part in 100 now, that's called a two solution. So it's directly related to the number of zeros on the amount of water, the comparative amount of water. So if you have a 5 solution, it's 5 zeros after the 1 and 1 part of substance in that. Now, as soon as you get up around 23, 24, 27 and such, depending on the substance, you get to what they call Avogadro's limit. This guy Avogadro was a troublemaker way back when, and he came up with this limit which says that there's only, at that point, for that particular substance, there's a chance in the solution you now have of there being 1 molecule of that substance present. If you do it again, you got 1 more order, 1 more dilution, there's 1 chance in 10 of there being 1 molecule of the substance in this liter or whatever of water. Well, folks, the homeopathy people start off at a dilution of 10 to the 50th, generally speaking. There are 10 to the 23rd stars in the universe. That's what I call dilute. Oh, but you ain't heard dilute yet. They go all the way up to 10 to the power of 1,500. That's extremely dilute. Now look at what that means. I called my friend Martin Gardner and said, "Martin, I really need something for the layman. I don't know what 10 to the 1,500th is. It's a huge number, very, very, very large number, but how do I illustrate that?" He said, "I'll call you back." Martin said, if you take 1 grain of rice, crush it up in a teaspoon, you then dissolve that powder in a sphere of water the size of the solar system, with the sun at the center and the orbit of Pluto at the outside. Then you repeat that process 2 billion times.
And as Stephen Barrett writes on quackwatch.org, quote, "To expect to get even 1 molecule of the medicinal substance allegedly present in 30x pills, it would be necessary to take some 2 billion of them," end quote. But of course, this is only absurd if you're coming at it from a traditional medicine vantage point. Simply adopt the completely unjustified idea that the solvent somehow remembers the substance that were mixed within it, and that this memory gets stronger and stronger the more dilute the original substance becomes, and presto, there's nothing to be confused about, except everything. I'm on Patreon. There's a link in the description if you'd like to support my content. I would really appreciate it. There's also social media links in there if you want to follow me there. I'm trying to build up some of those followings. I would really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe for more videos if you haven't already. Hit the bell, hit the like button, post a fucking comment. All that fun stuff that's standard on YouTube. You know the fucking drill. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this.